right, so now we'll move on to Doug, who's going to talk to us about a number of things, the symbolism, I guess.
Number of things.
And a number of things on the world wars and stuff.
And you know what, I'll start with something a little bit lighthearted. One of the things I got to thinking, is this is all about change, right? Astrology is all about change. And so, the planets from Jupiter through Pluto all involve change, or all spur change. Jupiter's a little harder to see, but the rest of them are pretty easy to see how they cause change. But I came up with this little hypothetical thing. So this is my real life sitting here. So this hypothetical thing is not my real life. It's a hypothetical life. We get along quite well. But so here's the planets from Jupiter to Pluto and their change. So Jupiter's change is, my wife and I are getting along great. I think I'll have an affair. Change is coming. Saturn's change is, my wife called me up at work and said we need to talk. Uh-oh. And Saturn starts out being polite, and if we don't get the message, if we don't buy into let me listen, that's when it gets mean. But Saturn starts out being polite. Uranus. I got home from work and found divorce papers my wife had left with the dog. Man, I had no idea. Neptune is, my wife ran off with the plumber. Said he's more emotionally sympathetic. Wow, I didn't see that coming. And then finally, Pluto. Man, got home, my wife left with the dog, threw all my stuff out on the lawn, cleaned out my bank accounts, my favorite antique car was burned to the frame. I think she's trying to tell me something. So, since that's probably the only humor we're going to have tonight, this is a pretty serious thing, but it's but all the planets, all the big planets really do cause change. And my information, a lot of it came from, I know Kim's going to talk about Jessica Murray's article in the Mountain Astrologer. Bill Herbst had an article right next to hers, and then Maurice Fernandez online had some good stuff to say. And Bill Herbst says that he says two things. He says, number one, that Saturn conjunct Pluto is the most important structural cycle in astrology. So that's a pretty bold statement. He also says that he calls the outer planets civilizational astrology. So I like that. My own personal approach to astrology in general, in terms of change and transits and cycles and everything, is that two things. One, I like Richard Tarnas has a saying that that astrology is archetypally predictive, not concretely predictive, and I love that. Because everything that happens. People may be wrong about who got elected or, whatever. But if you look at the archetypes that are involved, astrology is always right on target as far as archetypes. It's just that we don't understand how the archetypes play out. There's so many choices of archetypes. There's so many choices of how the archetypes play out. So that's one thing I love. And the other thing is expect the unexpected. It's like, try our best. We never know what's going to happen. We make guesses, we make stabs in the dark. People who have some good intuition sometimes come up with some good predictions, but that's more of an intuition thing, But the actual astrology thing is, we don't know what's going to happen. We try to do our best looking at the archetypes, And so, and quite often, I love to point out nothing happens. In personal astrology, there's this big transit going on, and you think, oh my God, the world's going to end, or this is going to happen. I'm going to get a job, I'm going to lose a job, whatever, and nothing happens. It's like, wow. So we don't know. My gut feeling is something is going to happen with this transit, with this configuration. But it's always important to keep that stuff in mind. We don't know what's going to happen. And I also noticed, I didn't get all your conjunctions, but I also noticed, the Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto conjunction in Capricorn in 1284. And so I looked on Wikipedia, what happened in 1284, and by golly, not a whole lot. It was like a bunch of little things, And, let me just say this. It was the Dark Ages. Maybe it was big for them. It wasn't big for me. Whatever. The 1518 one, however, that starts to get more into our modern age and starts to get more things we can relate to, And so at that time, it was the dawn of the Protestant movement. And let's make clear, the Protestant movement was wanting to reform corruption in the dominant but decadent power structure. So that's an important parallel right there.
And what sign was that in that year? Maybe Jim knows?
I'm not sure.
1518?
Pluto was in Capricorn. Saturn was in Capricorn.
In 1518?
Yeah, in 1518. I'm
Yeah.
looking right now at June 15th, 1518.
Yeah.
Saturn and Pluto are both in early Capricorn, but Jupiter is up in mid-Virgo. So I don't think there was a conjunction.
Yeah.
Of all three. Oh,
And-
we're just talking
But
about
it's
Saturn
trining
and Pluto.
it.
Yeah, and I actually wrote down it was just Saturn and Pluto at that point. Yeah, but that's a big thing. You know, there's a desire to reform a decadent, corrupt power structure, and also there was aggressive exploration of the New World happening at that time. That's when all the European powers were going all over and putting their flags all over the world. You're mine. This is mine. You know, and so my take home from that. And this is true, I think, of all these Saturn-Pluto things, is the key word I think of that I came up with is the world changes. You know, whether it's we discover, Christopher Columbus discovers the New World and we're after that, or whatever. I'll mention the wars in a minute, but you know, my impression of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction is that the world changes in some fashion. So again, I think some transits, nothing happens. In this case, I think something is going to happen. You know, this has kind of been set up in a lot of ways within the past few years. We've had Uranus square Pluto and Saturn square Neptune not too far back. And to me, you know, it's kind of this, it's sort of like, you know, in the 60s it was, I think, Uranus conjunct Pluto or something. And this is sort of like, it's kind of like a bad version of the 60s. You know, it's kind of like, you know, there's some changes going on. We had our first black president, gay marriage, pot's legal. I mean, man, I'm an old hippie. Who would have thought pot would be legal, you know? But, and it came about after I stopped smoking pot. That's even worse. But you know, anyway, you know, so it's kind of like the 60s in that all that kind of energy is going on. You know, at the same time, you know, you have this, the Capricorn, Saturn, and Pluto building up. And, you know, and a couple years ago when the campaigns were going on, whatever, you had Saturn square Neptune, which, you know, to me, that says fake news. I don't know if that anybody else relates to that. But, you know, and then we've had Jupiter and Scorpio recently, and, you know, that's the Me Too movement, you know, the truth coming out about deep, dark sexual secrets, you know. So so this is the buildup. We're building up to this. And, you know, so now we're at this place. Some of these other, some of these aspects that I just named have already kind of faded away or are fading away, and we're moving into this new thing. And, you know, the Capricorn thing, you know, all the Capricorn keywords, I wrote some down because I don't know who would, you know, you guys are very experienced, but I don't know who would be. So Saturn, structure, restrictions, new opportunities sometimes, karma, gathering, calling debts in, bureaucracy, power structures, control, money, work, career, status, social standing, public image, time, old age, lessons, discipline, responsibility, necessary changes, lessons, attachment to the material plane, ego. And I love the god Shiva. Anybody here know Shiva? And so Shiva's on the cover of my book, by the way. And beware, if you do look at that, that's only about 20% astrology, because I'm interested in how astrology, I'm very philosophical about things and interested in how it ties into other things. So it's not a typical astrology book. It's probably not going to be real accessible for most people. But anyway, the god Shiva, as Nataraja, the dancer, is on the cover. And what I love about Shiva and the connection to Saturn, and Shiva is ruled by Saturn in Hindu thought. And so Shiva in the picture there, he's got his hands like, well, he's got four hands, he's got two of them like this. And one hand has a drum in it, and the other hand has fire in it. So Shiva, which is Saturn, is simultaneously burning the world up, making the old world go away, and at the same time drumming in a new world. So, you know, so that to me, that says it all about Saturn. That's that process of, you know, the old has to go away to make room for the new. That's the eternal cycle. And so we're dealing with a lot of Capricorn. We got Saturn in Capricorn, we got Pluto in Capricorn. Couple things. So, you know, three themes that I see is, number one, there's minor themes too, but the three major themes I'd say is the economy, income inequality especially, and the economy in general. Wars, and a hopeful ending, and I think Kim's going to talk more about that too, a hopeful ending with Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius at the end of the year, at the end of 2020. So I looked up, in economic-wise, right now, we are overdue for a major correction. We've had a minor correction, but really, we've been going up for 10 years. That's a record in the history of the stock market, okay? And so we're overdue, even without astrology. If astrology didn't exist, we're overdue for a correction. However, I looked up bear markets in the stock market since 1929 of over 30%, because that's a pretty big deal, over 30%. So there was 7 of them. And in 4 of them, Saturn, so we have 2 squares and 2 oppositions. No conjunctions, but nonetheless, they're the hard angles. So in 4 of the 7 stock market corrections of 30% or more since 1929, 4 out of 7 do have Pluto and Saturn involved. So that's one thing, okay? And we're overdue. So I'll let you guys do the math. And I don't know what that means. And it might not happen. People have been predicting a correction for, about 8 years now. So, and then, in terms of power structure, I mean, Pluto, Pluto's a scorpionic planet, and it's friendly with Capricorn. Scorpio and Capricorns get along great. They're both power signs, right? I mean, they work a little differently, but they both like power. And so when you got them together, you got a double dose of power. And, just in terms of, and the word plutocracy, which some people have said America is becoming a plutocracy. So there you go, Pluto, And just in terms of income inequality, just to kind of refresh our memories where we're at here. So right now, the richest 1% own 45% of the world's wealth. In the United States, it's 42%. So the richest 1% own 42% of the world of U.S. wealth. And interestingly enough, the rise in inequality started around Reagan's time, which was the early 1980s. Pluto conjuncted Saturn in 1982. And so we have really a straight line in increasing income inequality from the early 80s till now. And, some of these statistics are just incredible. You can look them up, if you just don't want to fall asleep at night. But between 1980 and 2015, that's 35 years, the top 1% after tax, so we're talking after taxes, had about a 242% growth in their income. The middle 60%, i.e. the middle class, had 45%. So that's just income growth. Oxfam is a British nonprofit organization composed of some charities and stuff that try to track this kind of thing. And you may have seen, these were online, they're attention-grabbing statistics online. But they said in 2010, 388 people in the world owned about half the world's wealth. In 2015, it was down to, in 2014 it was down to 80 people, and in 2015 it was down to 62 people. 62 people in the world own half the world's wealth. I mean, it's pretty unbelievable, And so, that's opened up the door for, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and some of these people that are starting to address that. I mean, it's been a kind of a taboo subject in the U.S. And I mean, the U.S. chart, the U.S. chart has Pluto in the second house. I mean, that's the U.S. second house, and all of the action we're talking about tonight, all of this stuff, the Jupiter, Pluto, the Saturn, Pluto conjunction, everything, that's all taking place in the U.S. second house. So this is all about finances, or a lot of it's about finances. And so you start to see this energy build up, and looking back, it'll be much clearer. All this stuff's really clear looking back, So, but we can start to see these inklings. We see these stories about income inequality. We see some of these, quote, socialist Democrats popping up that can talk openly about this. They would have shut these people down a year or two ago. But now they're talking up. So this energy. The point is, this energy is building, and so we don't know what's going to happen. On top of that, we have the highest national debt ever, the highest level of national debt we've ever had. Saturn doesn't like debt, and of course, each side blames the other. right? And that's in terms of numbers. So you may say, well, with inflation, the numbers are high. It artificially skews it. Well, if you take national debt as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product, so we tie the years after World War II. So it was very high after World War II because we had to dig ourselves out. The world was destroyed. All our country's resources had been used up making tanks and stuff. We were at bottom. So we had to borrow to get back on top. Well, our debt right now, we're living in good times, right? But our debt right now is the equal of the worst it's ever been in U.S. history. That's pretty scary. Saturn doesn't like that. Interestingly enough, here's another, just a little sidebar tidbit. Uranus in Taurus, which is where it is now, was in Taurus between 1935 and 1942. And, that was a big period of socialism. It was the New Deal, WPA, make work for people. Social Security was started. I mean, all this stuff, that was during Uranus and Taurus, which it's in now. So you see this stuff. And, Saturn has a connection with fairness, both from a karmic level, right? It's karma, but also from it's exalted in Libra. So Saturn has a connection to fairness. And so one thing I notice is that, like in our current government, there's a lot of Capricorns that are either currently there or have already been waved goodbye. But there's been a lot of Capricorns recently. And I look at these socialist Democrats coming up, and there's a lot of Libra energy, which is kind of, in a way, the good side of Saturn. The Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Libra with Moon in Aries. Kamala Harris, Libra with Moon in Aries. Beto O'Rourke, Libra. So there's a lot of this Libra. So I just love watching these forces kind of bubble up, and we're going to see how they all play out. They're all going to play out before too long here. Let's see. And then finally, just to add a little depression to everything.
No more humor?
No more humor. Humor's done. Where is it here? Where did I put my notes? So the economy and class structure and that sort of thing is going to be big, I think. And then the other thing is, who knows if there'll be any conflicts? Wow. Here it is. Who knows if there'll be any conflicts? But I will say this. Number one, I love the phrase, the world changes. With this particular configuration, the world changes. So 1914, the opening of World War I, Saturn conjunct Pluto. 1931, Great Depression, Saturn opposition Pluto. Hitler starts his rise. 1939, Hitler invades Poland, Saturn square Pluto. 1946, 1947, Saturn conjunct Pluto. And so, 1946 and 47, to a lot of people, it doesn't really ring a bell. But if you think about it, if you look at history, if you think about it, after World War I, the U.S., Russia, and Great Britain basically sat down at a card table and said, okay, you get this country, you get this country, you get this country. Africa was divided up. The Middle East was divided up. Israel was created. India won its independence. India created Pakistan with a lot of bloodshed. So the whole world changed. The world changed after World War II. And so, again, I think that the optimistic thing is, I think it's going to be a bumpy ride in 2020. That's my opinion, but we don't know. Maybe nothing will happen. And another danger is that with Saturn and Pluto together, and Jupiter's doing these little pokes at Pluto, all through the year several times. And, Jupiter can inflate things. I mean, Jupiter could actually inflame the current situation. Saturn and Scorpio, Capricorn, Pluto, these are all guys that hang out together. These are the gangsters. These are the power guys. These are the business owners and stuff like that. So they could all get along. I mean, we don't know. It could all blow up in January of 2020, or it could actually consolidate and get worse. That these energies kind of feed on each other. But at some point, whether it's in January of 2020 or whether it's the end of the year, I really think that when Jupiter and Saturn conjoin in air, and that's a big thing you're going to talk about, how it's switching from Earth to air, conjoin in Aquarius at the end of the year, either change will be in progress at that time or change will start at that time. And so that's the positive thing, is the stuff in the world that is kind of plutocracy and angry and power oriented and and inequality oriented, all this kind of stuff, I really think by the end of 2020 is going to have some kind of progress forward into a different way. That's just my opinion. But I think there's a happy ending, but I think that things could be pretty bumpy in between. So that's all I got. Thanks.